What's going on, guys? It's Bromley from Empire Barbell, and today we're going back into Greg Nuckols' 28 free programs that he gives as part of his lead magnet on his website, Strength Theory. Go ahead and click the link. We're going to have a link to that in the description box to check out all the other things he has written about that. You want to get it straight from the source. But we're going to cover his deadlift twice per week protocol. We just did the once per week protocol. We're going to talk about how this one's a little bit different. And we've already gone through the squatting and bench protocols for once, twice, 3 times per week, beginner, intermediate, advanced. There's a lot of stuff we covered here. So starting out with the twice per week protocol, we have 2 days. This is the first time we start to see sumos being alternated with conventional. He says primary and opposite. So if you are a sumo puller, this would be sumo on your main day, conventional on your secondary day. But that seems to be his default for deadlifting more than once a week. Now it makes sense because it adds some variety. Your hips, hamstrings, your extensors, your quads all have to work differently. Your midsection has to work differently. So it's a good way of rounding out. It's also easier to recover from sumo is than conventional. So it makes sense that it would be a go-to twice a week on a second day to be able to get some extra pulling volume in, build up some variety for the sake of variety, while also not really impairing your recovery that much. So that kind of makes sense there. I'm particularly not a huge fan of it because one, conventional is a better developmental tool as it is. It's just universally harder, requires more work. And that's just physics. You're more disadvantaged. The bar has to go through more range of motion, and if you are a conventional deadlifter, that means that you have to specialize that much more. So I prefer frequency with deadlift to be a little more specific, and that might mean speed work on another day to keep the touches technical and crisp while not really impairing your recovery. But anyways, this is how he writes it out. So this is the beginner protocol. So the first day, we're going a top 5 at about an RPE 8, and then we're staying at the same weight for 2 sets at 3. And then this is just basically a true blue linear progression. You're just adding 10 pounds and repeating with a one more set on the back off volume. Again, adding 10 pounds on week 3, one more set. So the back off work volumizes. Not only are you increasing the weight, but you're doing more total sets. So that's a really valuable 1-2 punch that creates a ton of growth. It's really effective. I use that in my volumizing phases. Now, this isn't really a true blue phasic style of training. You are volumizing through this phase, and then the idea is you get here, hit a 1 rep max, and then start over with marginally more weight. I think eventually there's going to be a pretty quick limit. This seems like kind of a more advanced move for a beginner because beginners can handle quite a bit of work and progress off a very linear, very simplistic program. Once you start adding layers of complexity, then you're going to be running into a problem with their ability to carry it out, with their compliance, their understanding, their decision making. That's evident right here. The sumo also volumizes. Go 2 sets of 6, 3 sets of 6, 5 sets of 5. And he has some kind of convoluted instructions on how to progress. He says keep the weight the same as week 1 on week 2 and add 5 to 10 pounds each set that you feel like you have 2 or more reps left in the tank. It's not that complex, but the second you get newbies, novices making their own training decisions, you tend to run into some problems there. So I think that's a little unnecessarily complicated. I don't hate the entire run through. I actually like the once per week progression a little bit better than this, which went through a wider range of reps from 10 states to 6s to 4s and then repeated. And I think with that, you could just as easily plug in the sumo deadlifts on day 2. And it didn't seem like the once per week finished with a 1 rep max either. It was more rep based, which is more appropriate for beginners. I don't think beginners really have any business chasing a new 1 rep max if they are actually a true novice. So that's my 2 cents. This might actually work okay for some of you who are more early intermediate. So that's worth keeping track of, keeping in your mind. So going into the intermediate block, now we have percentages. Just like with the once per week protocol that he fleshed out, we went from using kind of auto-regulated methods, which are more appropriate for beginners who aren't going to have a set training max, and their training max is going to change very dramatically, very quickly in the beginning, week to week. So now we have a more stable training max, more technical proficiency, so we can utilize percentages to get to where we want to go. So now we're going on an intensifying run, 8 sets of 3 to 6 to 4, as the intensities climb. So this is pretty easy work, but it's a lot of working sets. So you're refining technique, becoming more confident, getting some volume. Then we go to 80%. It's a little more substantial. 85% for triples. That's a pretty substantial deadlift workout. And then we go into the 65% for 4 sets of 3, which is recovery in anticipation of this 1 rep max you're going to hit at the very end of it. RDLs and bent rows are done for some accessory volume. RDLs are a fantastic volume addition. They're really easy to run. They round out a lot of areas that tend to go neglected, so I like it for that reason. And then we still have the alternate stance, the sumo deadlift if you're pulling conventional, and vice versa. 3 sets of 6, 4 sets of 6, 5 sets of 6. A little bit interesting that day 1 intensifies as day 2 volumizes. Usually I like to have those go in step. If you're volumizing, if you're in a volume phase, that's what you're doing with everything. But this isn't a true phasic split, so it probably doesn't matter. The idea is to run through it and then reset on the other end with marginally more weight, so keep that in mind. I also think it's interesting to point out that Knuckles didn't opt to keep the same pattern he used for the once per week protocol, where the conventional day went two steps forward, 1 step back with the volume, heavy volume recovery, and then the 1 rep max on the end. Instead, this increases pretty linearly all the way to the end, and then you hit the 1 rep max on week 4. And also for intermediates, I don't know a lot of intermediates or advanced for that matter who are going to do a hard, even if it's sumo, even if it's easier to recover from. I don't know a lot of guys that are going to hit a really hard sumo deadlift for that volume and then do a 1 rep max 7 days later. That might work for some of you intermediates. There's not a lot of advanced guys that are going to be doing that. And that brings us to the advanced day, which is basically the intermediate day with rack pulls thrown in after your sumo deadlifts. Rack pulls are not that easy to recover from. I mean, yeah, the range is lower, but you can get a lot heavier, so your rectors can take even more of a beating. So there's kind of a trade-off there. If you're kind of an advantaged deadlifter, you might notice that you can get away with heavy rack pulls without them eating you up. For mere mortals, for most people, I would think that rack pulls create a bigger training stress. So I really thought it was interesting because his pattern for squatting and pressing is to add in volume that is easy to recover from. So more variations where the weight has to be lighter because you're disadvantaged, and more isolation work. Now on this one, he's using something where more advantage and recovery hit seems to be greater, which doesn't make it seem to be a great option for truly advanced lifters. Advanced lifters have to push their heavy efforts, especially with a recovery suck like deadlifts, further and further apart. That's one of the big problems with deadlifting as you get stronger, is trying to find the right schedule of recovery. So I really found that interesting that that's how we ran through the advanced portion. Now that reinforces what I've said all along. This seems to be generally, for all of his recommendations, a good beginner template. This is generally more appropriate for people who are a little stronger and have been around a little bit longer. But more than anything, these are logical progressions of each other. So if you've been doing this for a while, you get stagnant, you throw in some rack pull volume. The idea is that'll bump you out of homeostasis. But as you get truly advanced, you want to keep in mind that the rack pulls can present a big hit to your recovery. So that's my take on that. All in all, not a bad split. Not in love with sumos as a default alternate. I really would rather see things like stiff legs or RDLs or maybe deficit pulls for speed work, making up some of that stuff to be a more targeted, specialized, like conventionally specialized type of accessory work. But he has sumos in at the end, so I know guys like Cone have done that in the past. I know some good guys have recommended that. But either way, the progression is solid. He's starting to take into account recovery. As an intermediate, you get to this kind of volume crescendo. That's a little bit easier. This is a lot a bit easier, and then you recover. So we're still starting to get in elements of projecting out your heavy attempts. So if you have any questions, or if you've ran this and you have some feedback for us, go ahead and leave it in the comment box, or go ahead and take it to the forum, empire-forum.com. Until next time, this is Bromley from Empire Barbell. I'll see you.